Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. This is a topic I definitely didn't want to miss covering for you. And yeah, I have not yet gotten to immerse myself in it. This isn't the kind of like impromptu video I would usually do. I would read up a lot and stuff like that. But this was like dropped really unexpectedly. What am I talking about? Well, the Department of Justice in the United States, led by Merrick Garland, announced a gigantic lawsuit against Apple. They even made a press conference about it, about like half an hour long. Again, this isn't like super long, it's not like my live streams, but for the Department of Justice, it usually takes quite a bit for them to think, oh, this warrants like a video from us. And they aren't YouTubers, is what I'm trying to say. There's also an 88-page lawsuit, which I would love to analyze in detail. Definitely not everything today. Definitely something I would also want to do tomorrow. And then on Sunday, I'll try to keep notes as far as I can. Usually I just like for the first day to just internalize the information and then go into detail. But I do believe that we'll have enough to write down as the video goes along. And yeah, at some point I should get myself a second monitor to my MacBook, so just that I can like do a lot more stuff simultaneously. I do have my iPad here with the live chat and stuff like that. I really hope you guys will let me know if everything works out for you in terms of audio and video quality. I believe I'm streaming in 4K 60 right now for some reason, even though this video from the DOJ is 720p. But I hope it all works out. Regardless of that, I know most of you like enjoying my videos afterwards, after the live stream. So I hope if you have found this live stream at some point in the future, please consider that I might be doing similar live streams, well, while you might be watching this video afterwards, because this is a topic that will definitely get a lot of coverage unless Apple decides to shadow drop the iPad Pro, at which point I'll forget everything else basically and start covering the iPad Pro. At first, as always, cheers. I've already opened up the Coke because I came fresh home from the gym and really needed a pick-me-up. Besides that, I as always recommend you guys subscribe, like, share, comment, do all the YouTube jazz as I call it. This is primarily a live stream channel, so please, if you are interested in more comment, you can find both regular videos from me and live streams. And of course, in the description of this channel, you will find my Twitter account link. You will also find my Patreon link if you want to support this channel directly. Besides that, obviously, just watching helps a lot. And if you want to support this channel while I am live, there are super chats and super stickers that you can send if you feel like it. So I would love to start with the video. I've only gotten to watch parts of it while I was on the treadmill, so forgive me for not being yet super duper informed, but I hope it's interesting. And I've already heard some buzzwords here about monopolies and stuff like that. I should note that I'm not a lawyer, though I do come from a lawyer family, and not that that is an excuse for anything. So yeah, please let me know in the chat if you agree with something, if you disagree with something, and as always, if everything works out for you technologically. Let's begin.
We allege that Apple has employed from Apple and its competitors.
What?
We allege this because companies break the law. We allege that Apple has employed from Apple and its competitors. For developers, that has meant being forced to play by rules.
Okay, so there were apparently probably some technical issues in the beginning of the video. I guess he's trying to say that we are here to protect people from companies going against the law. And the first point he mentions are developers. Steve Ballmer used to say, developers, developers, developers.
Isolate Apple from competition. And as outlined in our complaint,
okay,
we allege that Apple has consolidated its monopoly power, not by making its own products better, but by making other products worse.
Okay.
Apple carries out its exclusionary anti-competitive conduct in two principal ways. First, Apple imposes contractual restrictions and fees that developer can offer iPhone users. Second, Apple selectively restricts access to the points of connection between third-party apps and the iPhone's operating system, degrading the functionality of non-Apple apps and accessories. As a result, for most of the past 15 years, Apple has collected a tax in the form of a 30% commission on the price of any Apple is able to command these fees from companies of all sizes. Apple has also
So let's start with some very, very base level information here. I know everything he's basically going to say. There's a lot of meme stuff here. Now, contractual restrictions and fees refers to basically the entire commission structure of the App Store, and of course Apple's guidelines and rules for what can be on the App Store and how it can be handled, including stuff such as outside linking, and of course any kind of restricted content that Apple doesn't like. How Apple also monetizes in-app purchases and stuff like that. So this is what is meant by contractual restriction and fees. This is basically the closed down nature of the App Store, and then selectively restricts access for third parties. Basically comes down to, well, if you are an app on the App Store, do you have the same system level access as an Apple made app, right? At first, for example, not every app had Siri access, which Apple obviously remedied in time, right? Can you work in the background before background app refresh was added and stuff like that? Voice over IP calls and how they show up in the operating system versus before. Again, Apple has fixed a lot of that stuff, adding API after API after API, but you can still argue the fact that, yeah, the way the third-party apps work, even the best of them, would have by definition less access to the operating system than an Apple-made app. Now, this isn't to say that this is inherently evil, but it does give Apple a leg up, especially when it comes to Sherlocked apps. Sherlocked apps would be apps that already existed in some kind of form through third parties, but were eventually introduced as native pre-installed apps in the operating system by Apple or some kind of other vendor. So if you were a Notes app maker who didn't have the same system access that Apple does, and now your Notes app cannot compete because Apple introduced some kind of functionality that is deeply connected to the rest of the operating system, other Apple services and stuff like that, well, now you would be losing out. And of course, this is where he is going now. Apple has a 30% commission rate on the App Store. That means if an app costs $1, 70% goes to the developer, 30 cents go to Apple. There are exceptions for that. Smaller developers with under $1 million of revenue can lower that effectively to 15%, as can subscription apps for customers where the subscription runs for over a year. Yes, and of course, developers, I believe this would go back to contractual restriction and fees, do have to pay Apple $100 a year to be hosted on the App Store. However, with that, you could potentially upload a free app, and basically beyond those $100, you never have to pay anything ever again, even if the app gets 1 billion downloads or anything like that. So there are pros and cons. The European Union has the Digital Markets app that we covered in the past that goes over some of those things. But with the United States, it's a little bit more difficult because the United States by itself is much more influential than the European Union, I would argue. And of course, Apple is a US company. That means that Apple has a larger market share in the United States. Apple has a larger revenue amount and profit amount that is generated through the United States. So anything that happens in the United States will and can hurt them much more than anything that the European Union does. So let's see how he continues.
Of programs like cloud streaming apps, including gaming apps, as well as super apps that could reduce user dependence on Apple.
Okay, now we are getting into meme territory. Cloud gaming apps. This is where this shows me, by the way, that this was set up quite a while ago and has yet to be updated. Cloud gaming apps have been fixed. Apple does allow cloud gaming apps these days. What else did he notice?
Apple's gaming apps press the emergence of programs like cloud streaming apps.
Cloud streaming, okay. Not gaming, I guess.
In gaming apps, as well as super apps that could reduce.
Okay, I don't know if he means like gaming in general or if he means like cloud gaming. I'll leave that be. Super apps. This is such bullshit. Like, does anybody really want a Western WeChat? Is my argument here. Is WeChat with one we, or is that like I believe it's like this. So yeah, it's such a weird point to make.
System and expensive hardware. And as any iPhone user who has ever seen a green text message or received
Bro, this is
grainy video can attest.
bro, this is such meme-worthy material, like green bubbles. Yeah, okay. By the way, green bubbles. RCS is coming later this year. So, again, several of the problems he mentioned are not problems really for most people. And one of them is fixed. One of them is kind of malleable. I would argue that the 30% commission rate is not like universal. And then green bubbles, there is already a fix on the way.
Apple's anti-competitive more difficult for iPhone users to message with users of non-Apple products.
That is not true. WhatsApp exists, Telegram exists, Signal exists, WeChat exists. Oh, this is so, like...
Does this by diminishing the functionality of its own messaging, diminishing the functionality of third-party messaging.
That is absolutely not true. RCS did not exist until a little bit ago, and even now it is barely feature complete, largely relying on the servers of a competitor. This is complete bullshit. The argument with iMessage was that iMessage was not available on other platforms, not that Apple's own app does not do RCS. RCS is relatively new, and RCS is only asked for by like tech nerds. Regular people wanted iMessage on Android, which it would be basically reaching out to competitors. This is a wrong ass take.
By doing so, Apple knowingly and deliberately degrades quality, privacy, and security for its users.
That is bullshit. Like, for one, this is a very highly specialized scenario where somebody sends you like SMS. And in that case, yeah, SMS is non-encrypted and stuff like that. But iMessage was the progenitor of like highly encrypted, highly functional, integrated chat messengers on smartphones. What kind of attitude is that? Like, you can argue about options, but it's like, this is a degradation of quality. This is quality that never existed. It's not like Apple deliberately like deleted RCS out of the pipeline that like existed long ago. It didn't exist until like 2 years ago, and until half a year ago, it wasn't really feature complete.
For example, if an iPhone user messages a non-iPhone user in Apple Messages, the text appears not only as a green bubble, but incorporates limited functionality. The conversation is not encrypted. Videos are pixelated and grainy. Not edit messages or see typing indicators.
I mean, this is all nice and good, but there's literally a fix coming on the way. So,
As a result, iPhone users perceive rival smartphones as being lower quality because the experience of messaging friends and family who do not own iPhones is worse, even though Apple is the one responsible for breaking cross-platform messaging.
They're not breaking it. It didn't. What do you mean? It exists in WhatsApp, in Signal, in Telegram. Like, everybody knows that those apps exist. They choose not to use them because they prefer iMessage and because the vast majority of their friends run with iMessage. That's the point. Apple makes the argument that if you want our service, you buy our hardware. We are not a services-centered company the way that a Facebook is, the way that a Google is, or Microsoft is. Our hardware, similar to how consoles have exclusive games, has exclusive apps, has exclusive services, and because we are a hardware, software, and services maker, we happen to make apps and services that better integrate with our hardware, including the fact that sometimes our first-party apps, our first-party services will have functionality that third-party apps will not immediately have. But over time, with APIs, with outreach to developers, we will let them introduce those features. This goes back as far as iPhone OS 2 and iPhone OS 3. This is not something purely imposed on Apple by like regulatory agencies. Apple has been reaching out to developers and expanding third-party functionality ever since iPhone OS and iPhones existed, even before it was renamed to iOS. So this is some hardcore bullshit here.
And it does so intentionally.
I mean, Apple degrades quality, I guess. Degrades quality, security, and privacy, which is ironic because literally the reason how iMessage was like pitched was because it brought quality, security, and privacy over SMS. RCS did not exist back then. They're like, this is bullshit narrative to try to lump it all into like, oh, for 15 years. For one, the iPhone launched in 2007. For the first year, it didn't even have the App Store. Then the App Store launched, by the way, with the same 30% commission rate as now. It was never changed. In fact, it was only like Apple introduced exceptions for the 30% commission. They introduced, as I said before, the lower commission rate for smaller developers. And yes, there were stuff where I believe they were wrong. Like, for example, they were limiting cloud gaming apps for a while. This is fixed now. Super apps, I have no idea why we want super apps really, but I guess this is something that Apple limits, even though people use WeChat in China, regardless how limited it supposedly is with the native APIs. And then the green bubble problems, yes, they exist between iOS and Android, but they do not exist because Apple didn't introduce RCS. It's because Apple didn't port iMessage itself. RCS was not a solution that Apple could have introduced 14 years ago during the launch of I believe iMessage was introduced with iOS 5, right? Or so it's 13 years, I guess. Like, this stuff didn't exist, and Apple never went out of their way to prevent like third-party messengers to be super successful. This is why the rest of the world comfortably relies on WhatsApp, and WhatsApp is relatively high quality. It's mostly secure and private, if you want to believe that, I guess. But this idea that like Apple undermines those things, like, they literally said RCS is coming, so, and I'm not going to repeat that a billion times.
For example, in 2013, a senior executive at Apple explained that supporting cross-platform Apple messages, quote, would simply serve to remove an obstacle to iPhone families giving their kids Android phones.
Yeah. Again, the same goes for consoles. Like, why is my PlayStation friends list not compatible with my Xbox or Nintendo friends list? Well, to be pretty honest, it's about keeping you in the PlayStation ecosystem and stuff like that. Same goes for the other devices. Like, yeah, this is how companies sell their shit. Like, I have no idea where this, like, this is the problem. I feel like that the biggest companies in the world right now are mostly services companies, like Microsoft and Google, even like Steam and stuff like that. And they all want to make the argument, well, we are all cross-platform. Yes, because you're services companies. You live from putting all your shit on every other piece of shit out there. This is not the case for Apple. Apple is first and foremost a hardware company, and this is like services can be just as like a selling point as a processor or a camera component or a display or a sensor or a port. Like, they can help you sell a piece of hardware. Like, nobody says, why isn't like Zelda, like, Nintendo doesn't want my kid to play Zelda on a PC. Hell yeah, they don't. They want you to buy a Switch so that you eventually buy other games there, so they can make some profit on the hardware sale, so they can sell you an annual subscription. Like, this is not exclusive to Apple by any means.
Close quote. In 2022, Apple's CEO was asked whether Apple would fix iPhone to Android messaging.
And they are.
Added, quote, not to make it personal, but I can't send my mom certain videos, close quote. Apple's CEO responded, buy your mom an iPhone.
I mean, yeah. I mean, that's such a bullshit thing. It's like having like two of Fords in your garage, right? And yeah, you could theoretically like exchange parts between them, but then another the family member, instead of a Ford, gets like a Chevy, right? And then you're like, well, now I cannot exchange parts anymore. Why is that, Ford? And Ford will go to you, well, buy the other family member a Ford car, I guess. Like, yeah, not everything is designed to be intercompatible 100% all the time. Where have we taken this like idea from?
In addition to selectively controlling app distribution and creation, we allege that Apple is violating the law by conditionally restricting developers' access to the interface, which is needed to make an app functional on the Apple operating system. For a product like a smartwatch, it must be able to communicate with the iPhone's operating system.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Apple creates barriers that make it extremely difficult and expensive.
Yeah, those are called sandboxes. Yes, there are also security and privacy features. By the way, there are also battery and performance protection features, so that not every piece of crap app can just run everything at once in the background and eat up all your internal resources, but it is what it is.
Developers to venture outside the Apple ecosystem. When it comes to smartwatches, Apple not only drives users to purchase an Apple Watch, which is only compatible with an iPhone, it also uses its technical and contractual controls to make it harder for someone with an iPhone to use a non-Apple smartwatch.
Okay, so I guess now we are attacking also their hardware strategies, because I hate the YouTube app sometimes. So Apple Watch not compatible with Android, I guess is his point, right? And the other point is Android or simply other watches barely compatible with iPhone. I wouldn't say they aren't entirely, but most companies don't even try these days. Barely compatible with iPhone. That is interesting if that lawsuit would go so far as to enforce this kind of like barrier breaking, I would call it, just to be nice to Merrick Garland. God, to think that I liked this guy so much and felt bad for him when Republicans blocked him from the Supreme Court. But he probably would have made a decent Supreme Court justice, right? It's just that the DOJ, like, I really like Biden. I don't think I'm hiding that. Like, I've said that multiple times and stuff like Twitter. But, like, a lot of the people working for Biden are, like, really meme politicians in that regard, and I don't even mean like Merrick Garland specifically, but there are a lot of people who try to appease like the more left-leaning Twitter crowd and stuff like that. But by the way, it's by no means as bad as what is happening on the right wing with people like Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene or anything else like that. But this idea that this is somehow a priority right now in any way. I also hate the fact that none of this is happening through actual legislation, right? Because this is an antitrust case. This is an anti-monopoly case. This is not actually enforcing some kind of relevant new law that is targeting digital companies. Which I guess is what I would classify Apple under with this stuff. If like the United States Congress, the Senate, the White House had together passed a law that said all of those things are bad, right? That big platforms at the point should have maybe a lower commission, or have like far less restrictive contracts and fees, and that third-party apps need to have some kind of arbitration system to argue that they need deeper system access, that maybe we need some kind of committee in general to decide what kind of functionality has to be either allowed on the App Store or has to be like allowed through APIs and stuff like that, deeper system access. And then this is just an appeal, by the way, to like bullshit emotions. Like, this is not true. Apple does not degrade quality, security, and privacy with green bubbles. Apple did not offer an extra feature that Google basically designed with carriers together, and it was for a long time feature incomplete. Instead, Apple kept running with a feature that they introduced as far back as 2011 and have been improving ever since. And yes, they never bothered to port it because this feature helped them sell more iPhone hardware. This is how actual competition works. All competition is not supposed to be 100% basically cross compatible. Competition is not supposed to deliver you the same kind of opinion about how hardware and services should work. Apple has a right to ask for certain guidelines on their own store, which they build for their own hardware.
In a single app, including credit cards, personal identification, movie tickets, and car keys. Apple Wallet is Apple's proprietary digital wallet on the iPhone.
Okay.
Apple actively encourages banks, merchants, and other parties to participate in Apple Wallet, but it simultaneously exerts its monopoly power to block these same partners from developing payment products and services for iPhone users. For example, Apple has blocked third-party developers from creating competing digital wallets on the iPhone that use what is known as tap-to-pay functionality. That is
how much you want to bet he had no idea what tap-to-pay means before, like, the people working for him informed him.
That makes a digital wallet, well, a wallet. Instead, Apple forces those who want to use the wallet function to share personal information with Apple, even if they would prefer to share that information solely with their bank, medical provider, or other trusted third party.
Like, what do you mean by what I just wrote? Josephat, hi. Josephat, you're saying they seem to be assuming compatibility automatically benefits the consumer without making the case for it. Well, yeah, that goes in line, by the way, with what I just wrote. I say he makes claims about user behavior that are not backed up by survey. For example, surveys, I guess. He just said there are people who would prefer to keep their private information like private and not give it to Apple, not give it and just share it with their bank and health service provider. But by any survey I have ever seen, Apple enjoys bigger trust by the public than any bank and public or health service provider. I guess public in the US is kind of a dirty word because it kind of sounds socialist, doesn't it? But like, yeah, like he assumes that everything has to work the same way and then consumers benefit. I have always said that competition also has to allow for devices that work drastically differently and often sometimes in limited ways. By the way, Josephat, can you tell me if the audio from Merrick Garland is loud enough for you? Like, this is a bullshit like YouTube video from the Associated Press. I've checked the others, they're all as bad, and it's just mono audio, so it's just coming from my left ear, for example, so I don't know if it's even loud enough.
When an iPhone user puts a credit or debit card in Apple Wallet, Apple inserts itself into the process that would otherwise occur directly between the user and the card issuer.
No, well, yeah, but that's also because of how NFC works in general. Unless you make an app where the card maker like has access to NFC, which again, the Digital Markets app in the European Union has enforced this kind of functionality, and I believe the API is either there in 17.4 or will be coming, but it's really quite, to be honest. It can go up 50%. Yeah, I have no idea. I'll just make a screen capture, advanced audio properties. So I'll just make it ridiculously loud. Thank you, by the way. I think I make it a whole like 7 decibels or something.
This introduces an additional potential point of failure for the privacy and security of Apple users.
Does it work better for you, Josephat?
In which Apple is willing to make the iPhone less secure and less private in order to maintain its monopoly power. The Supreme Court defines monopoly power as, quote, the power to control prices or exclude competition.
Okay. Monopoly by Supreme Court definition, power to control prices or exclude competition. Interesting take. So it's not about a certain market share or anything like that. You know what, Josephat? I'll just go all the way up to 10 decibels, which should be about double as loud, and then I think it should work. I hate how low effort the United States government tech is when it comes to stuff like this. Like, how the do you post a mono audio video clip in 2024? This is so beyond me.
As set out in our complaint, Apple has that power in the smartphone market. Now, having monopoly power does not itself violate the antitrust laws, but it does when a firm acquires or maintains monopoly power, not because it has a superior product or superior business acumen, but by engaging in exclusion.
Okay, interesting. So, monopoly by itself doesn't break antitrust. Maintaining it via, and this is like my own word now, malicious this is, right? So this is basically what he is saying, and my counter argument is that Apple has only changed for the better. Like, those rules he's talking about, those are 2008 rules from the introduction of the App Store. like the 30% commission has only gotten more exceptions and more opportunities for it to be 15 instead of 30%. Cloud streaming apps, yes, though the rules there were a little bit unclear, and then Apple went like really restrictive on them, and then Apple fixed them. Now granted, that had a lot to do with the pressure from the DMA, but it's fixed now. And the green bubbles will soon be improved through RCS. Super apps exist in countries like China. Wallet apps, I guess, is something that the US could get through, because it's also something that is currently going through in the European Union. So I would say that Apple has never like done the Darth Vader thing, right? And said like, ooh, I'm altering the deal, pray I don't alter it any further. I would say that since 2008, Apple has been on a clear trajectory of listening to developers, listening to the law whenever needed, and I would argue that no new law has come into place that would put all those things into illegal territory. Now, antitrust and anti-monopoly lawsuits do not have to involve necessary new laws whenever there's like a transition from like analog to digital and something like that, from TV to internet and stuff like that. You can try to basically use already existing laws, existing like lawsuit precedents and stuff like that. But I would argue this is a very novel application of antitrust laws and regulations. At least the DMA had a lot to do with like I would argue more proper research by the European Union. I would argue the European Union made a lot of mistakes in how they basically put out the Digital Markets app, but this looks way more stupid to me.
Conduct. As set out in our complaint, Apple has maintained its power not because of its superiority, because of its unlawful exclusionary behavior.
By the way, I just want to appeal to like the USA guys, right? Apple is undoubtedly America's largest hardware company. Now, they don't manufacture a lot of that hardware in the United States, but unless we're looking at like car manufacturers, which I guess produce more hardware in like raw volume, like the amount of revenue that Apple generates all over the world, the amount of taxes that Apple pays in the United States, like this kind of bashing of one of your strongest companies in a market where there's no other US competitor, right? What US company exists in the smartphone market at this point, right? Motorola is Chinese at this point. Google does the Google Pixel, which basically doesn't matter in the broader market. Microsoft doesn't do shit. Like, what? Is it just that Google controls Android and this is why we need to turn iOS into Android? But that would only benefit like a Korean company like Samsung or Chinese companies if the US ever allows more Chinese companies into the United States. This is extremely un-United States.
Monopolies like Apple's threaten the free and fair markets upon which our economy is based. They stifle innovation.
This is not true. Like, this is entirely not true. For one, this is a highly like US specific outlook. There exists like Apple in many markets has like a sub 10% market share, and even in their more successful markets, they're usually sub 20% market share. So this idea that it holds like innovation that at this point mostly happens on a global scale and not a national scale is absolutely ridiculous. Josephat, I'd be like China bashing ByteDance. Yeah, like imagine if China came out and said like, you know what, TikTok, man, It just doesn't work. Well, I guess China sometimes does that shit because, like, China did attack their own, like, gaming companies because Xi Jinping hates gaming, and so he wants kids to play fewer games so they're more productive in school. But I guess he could also come out against TikTok and say, like, "Oh, I don't like the meme TikToks. I don't get them, and they sometimes use Winnie the Pooh or something like that." But yeah, imagine if they actually bashed not TikTok itself, but like ByteDance and the overlying company. It's amazing, honestly, how stupid this is.
Producers and workers, and they increase costs for consumers. If left unchallenged, Apple will only continue to strengthen its smartphone monopoly.
That is not true, by the way. Like, this is what I'm trying to say. Like, he has mentioned explicit points that were improved over times. This is why I'm arguing that if there were laws that just unapologetically told Apple, okay, a 30% commission rate is not okay given your revenue and profit levels, right? You have to lower it now to 20. Boom, already much better. Cloud streaming apps. Let's say we have an independent arbitration committee that says, boom, you cannot do that because those are like emerging apps. You're stifling innovation here. Have to this regulation on the App Store has to go. Right? Green bubbles, RCS. Nobody can tell Apple to integrate shit into their own stuff. But I guess you could argue that maybe Apple could be forced to offer iMessage on Android, I guess. Apple Watch compatibility, that is like an enormous like development effort and stuff like that. I have no idea if this could go through, but I guess he needed to mention a lot, which, by the way, he talks like for over 6 minutes. He has said a lot, I would guess, for like the general public, but for anybody knowledgeable, like half his points are like easily disputable, while the other half of the points are somewhat controversial, to the point where I would say that there aren't like 100% slam dunks in either direction. I could see an argument for Apple Wallet being open up a little bit. I could see arguments about like again, like for cloud streaming apps if they weren't already fixed. But yeah, so it's a little bit incoherent if you know a lot about this.
But there's a law for that. The Justice Department will vigorously enforce antitrust law. Enforcing the law protects consumers from higher prices and fewer choices. That is the Justice Department's legal obligation.
Well, I guess the one thing that speaks for him in this regard is Apple's enormous market share in the United States, right? It regularly goes like above half. So I guess you could maybe argue that, like, yes, it stifles options, but I would argue, and this is actually US restrictions on Chinese companies are far more detrimental to choice and price than anything mentioned about Apple. This is, I have to say, I'm not a huge fan of how China does business with intellectual property theft, with forcing companies to basically operate through intermediaries in China, which leads to more intellectual property theft. But if the United States wanted actual competition on the same way that like even the European Union has, not only would they like stop their war against Huawei, but like they would be far less restrictive to companies like Xiaomi and stuff like that. There's a reason, by the way, why all those companies are technically not that separate. Like OnePlus is connected to like Oppo and all those other brands, right? But OnePlus operates in the West, while the other stuff, well, it does operate in, for example, the European Union, but far less so in the US. So, for example, BYD, a leading electric vehicle company, which, by the way, have created a ton of their own intellectual property. They are not a Tesla copy like some make out to say. They're one of the most innovative companies right now when it comes to battery tech and stuff like that. And guess what? With how restrictive the United States import stuff is, they said we will not be importing our shit to the United States. Whilst with the European Union, they announced that they want to triple their market share in the EU over a small period of time, which means they are already seeing some success and they want to quickly grow it. This idea that like, this is what holds back Samsung, for example, is bullshit.
That is what
It's by the way, it's the same stupid shit as with like the USB-C, right? People said like, oh, Apple has like Lightning to hold back like people from switching to devices that have USB-C. Then Apple introduced USB-C, and their iPhone 15 generations is one of their most highly regarded and most best-selling ever, growing their market share in several regions. This is like such bullshit.
people expect, that is what they deserve.
No, well, I mean, he says people expect them to hold up antitrust law. He doesn't say people expect all that shit. If he expects that, by the way, he is delusional. Those points are mainly like points made by other companies when we are talking about Epic, when we are talking about Microsoft, all companies that basically don't want to pay any kind of commission, be it 30 or 15%. Companies that want a deeper system access, whether it's to have their own marketplace like the Epic Game Store on there, or to maybe have like their own wallet apps and stuff like that. Most regular consumers never think about that. Like my grandma has an iPhone XS Max at this point running iOS 17. Do you think she cares that she can only download apps from the App Store? Do you think she cares about a 30% commission rate? Yeah. Great. And by the way, she perfectly fine uses WhatsApp with most of the family, and sometimes iMessage with me and my mom.
To the attorneys and staff of the department's antitrust division for their tireless work on this case on behalf of the American people. I'll now turn the podium over to the Deputy Attorney General.
Okay, let's see if she has more actual technical knowledge.
Mr. Attorney General, and
but
good morning,
she's
everyone.
short.
In our fight against corporate misconduct, the department's approach is straightforward and relentless. We identify the most serious wrongdoers, whether individuals or companies, and then we focus our full energy and devote all necessary resources to holding them accountable. Accountability promotes fairness, it drives deterrence, and it advances the rule of law. By holding all companies to the same standards, our approach to corporate enforcement benefits all Americans.
Just what you're saying, it reminds you of when Fortnite wanted to make the case that users should care about Apple's 30% commission. Well, I think Fortnite had one point there, right? And that is, look, if we want to have a super sustainable business, we have to at least increase prices somewhat, right? It doesn't have to be like 30%, can be 10, 15%, because obviously there's some value provided by the App Store there as well that lowers cost on their sides, right? And I feel like the worst thing that Epic did was, instead of saying, okay, let us go through the courts, they tried to basically put the workaround there in the system and give us basically a commission-free, but also non-App Store related Fortnite bucks purchases. I don't know. I don't play Fortnite. I'm too old for that, I guess. Or V-Bucks? Yes, is it V-Bucks? I have no idea. I'm so stupid. And the point that I'm trying to make here is people care about stuff such as lower prices. People care about options. I'm not denying that. I think there is a good point to be made that Apple needs to like open up a little. I have said time and time again, for example, emulators are 100% legal as long as the underlying emulator was properly reverse engineered and doesn't by default like advertise anything related to ROMs, firmware downloads and stuff like that. This is why I say emulators, for example, like the Delta emulator, should be allowed on the App Store regardless of what Nintendo thinks or doesn't think. Right? In the worst case, like Citra and Yuzu, you can remove those emulators if you find out that the developers of that emulator didn't basically do their due diligence to not promote ROMs, to maybe even have like some not very fair like reverse engineering stuff. I don't want to excuse anybody of anything, so I'll leave it at that, right? And the problem with this is, like, I care about emulators and stuff like that, but at this point, I also have a choice. I can switch to Android, or I can buy an Android as a secondary device, or I can buy some kind of gaming device, like even like a Steam Deck, and install my stuff on there. Choice is not about everything working exactly the same. Choice is not about everything working perfectly with everything else. Choice is when something that you want is available to you in a like non-forced way, right? And to me, the idea that iMessage with green bubble shit to Android is like forcing you to buy something and not enticing you to buy something. This is where I draw the line, because I believe that a hardware company like Apple should have the right to make services, apps, and software functionality exclusive to them. Now, because of Apple's enormous market share, I also understand that they have basically not just rights, but also responsibilities that maybe a smaller company does not have. For example, I'm a social democrat. I fully believe that with how big Apple's revenues and profits are, they should be paying higher taxes. I am also absolutely fine with, for example, the App Store being forced to take a smaller commission, because the App Store is already so big and so profitable, and basically no relevant developer can escape it, right? I am all fine with even maybe mandating some kind of form of site loading, but rewriting basically how a lot of Apple's basic system functionality works is entirely intrusive and unjustified, because it basically tells you that a company does not have a right to create a killer product as long as that product is somewhat limited, right? This I entirely disagree with. This is why I've argued that consoles should not be subject to any of those regulations, nor should be Apple smartphones, in my opinion, but at least I can understand with how big Apple is. But with consoles, I have argued I don't want consoles to be open up the same way PC is. There's not only is there an underlying business model there with software financing the hardware, but which is, by the way, not a legal excuse. This is just an excuse that Tim Sweeney made up, but I'm fine with using it on a moral perspective, just not an illegal one. But also, consoles offer you a curated experience. Like, there's one digital store there. There's like one format for discs that you can use. Like, there are a handful of like apps for like movie streaming and stuff like that. Stuff is vetted and controlled by the platform holder. The platform holder itself has to invest into exclusive functionality and games, and Apple does the same stuff. This is what people don't understand. The iPhone is not a PC. The iPhone is basically a hyper-functional console.
Americans who deserve and who demand a justice system that holds accountable those who break the law. For over a century, our federal
Josephat, how's the audio? Because it's terrible mono audio in one of my ears.
That fuels and drives our nation's economy. These laws protect consumer choice in the market, they keep prices in check, they promote quality, and they open doors to innovation. Today, the department alleges that Apple, one of the world's largest tech companies, crossed the line from rigorous competition to anti-competitive exclusion.
Okay, this is oh god, I hate this kind of argumentation so much. So basically, Apple has crossed the threshold. It's still pretty low. Does it not change? Oh my god, but thank you for letting me know, I guess. I'll just go to fucking 15. By the way, guys, whenever you can see nothing but my screensaver, that's because I've turned on OBS, and OBS does not show up in the OBS
lawfully obtained a
capture.
monopoly in violation of the Sherman Act. The complaint makes clear that for years, Apple has tightened its grip on the smartphone market. It has done so not through product improvements, but by maintaining a chokehold on.
Okay, now this is like, why is Apple's market share improving then? Like, I don't understand it. Like, Apple has introduced those features and people like those features. Like, Apple has increased their chokehold. I guess this is how it's written, right? Not through improvements, which, by the way, the iPhone gets like upgraded every year. There's new iOS versions, there are new accessories to buy. Like, this is such bullshit. Like, even something like MagSafe, like the iPhone 12 getting 5G and MagSafe, the new design, right? This is why people ran out to buy the iPhone 12 generation. Then the iPhone 13 Pro finally introduced ProMotion. You can argue whether or not some of those features exist on other phones, not all of them and not in the same kind of way, but like, I don't understand, why does Apple grow in the European Union where WhatsApp is basically the default messenger? Why does Apple perform well in China where WeChat basically makes every phone feel the same? Like, I have no idea. Like, the 30% commission, why do developers not forsake the App Store and promote Android then, if it's so much lower there? By the way, it's not, even though you can ignore the Google Play Store on Android, you de facto have to use it for any relevance. So Apple has increased their chokehold not through improvements, but through, I guess, restrictions, right? That's her point here. What a bullshit point. Oh, Josephat, you're saying the audio is better. Thank you. You're welcome.
To the iPhone, while locking.
It's not my fault, by the way. You guys know that I usually pick out decent audio and video quality settings. It's really this video from the DOJ.
Competitors out of the market. As a result, and as
what competitors? There's Samsung, like what? LG was at some point in the United States, I guess, and then some companies couldn't hold on to Motorola and had to sell it to China. Like, what US companies are you talking about at that point? Or even just other companies? Like, you don't allow half of the companies that could actually compete into the market itself.
Details. Apple has gone from revolutionizing the smartphone market to stalling its advancement. This shift has smothered and
wow, my God, those are like internet talking points. Like, did Tim Sweeney purchase those guys? Like, Apple is stalling the smartphone market. Why exactly? Because Android offers those things, and the interoperability between iMessage and Android messages is green and not high quality video, even though everybody who wants to can use WhatsApp, Telegram, Signal, all those.
Entire industry,
from
users to app developers to the next generation of innovators. Apple's anti-competitive conduct must stop. 16 other attorneys general agree and have joined us in bringing this lawsuit.
16 other attorneys general, so I guess that means of 16 states out of 50? That means you couldn't get 2/3?
Against Apple. I want to thank the women and the men of the Antitrust Division for their commitment to promoting competition and protecting consumers and workers in all of their work. And I want to thank Assistant Attorney General Cantor for his leadership. Their work makes clear that
right, Joseph, what you were saying, these talking points are insane. Why is the point should be, Apple is an extremely innovative company. Like, if you are, especially in the United States, right? Dude, this is how you fucking get Apple to side with Republicans. If this is what Democrats want, and I'm not saying that it's justified to switch to Republicans, but if your entire business becomes attacked like this by Democrats, which, don't get me wrong, I understand those people uphold the law sort of regardless of party allegiance, but let's be also honest, Merrick Garland is very much a centrist, more on the Democrat side, center-left, I guess. So are the people working for him, and like the idea that Apple has stalled the smartphone market, which enjoys like vibrant competition all over the world, but companies have repeatedly chosen to go the Apple route because this is the route that customers actually ended up preferring. Like even stuff like removing SD cards and like routes like not having removable batteries and stuff like that. All that stuff that companies used to tout, they didn't remove it because they felt comfortable with the monopoly. Like LG never had a monopoly on that regard or anything, right? They did it because consumers didn't ask for them, because a lot of that shit were like internet talking points, and those are internet talking points. Like this is not actually legal. Like guys, I'll show you briefly something. I'll be going, I don't know how much I can do any today because I have been on my legs since like 5 a.m. today, and I've had a very, very stressful day yesterday, so I have no idea how much time I'll be able to invest. But before this entire shit is over, and I mean like before obviously the lawsuit is concluded, I want for us, and I don't care if those videos get 0 views because I'm doing this for me, I want to read through all of this. I want to really see, because I've read a little bit through this, and everything here is like super, super emotional, which I've read through a lot of lawsuits, especially with stuff like the Trump indictments recently. I've read through International Court of Justice documents regarding the Israel-Palestine situation, and I've had an interest in legal stuff since my childhood because both of my parents are lawyers by education. This, to me, is one of the most ridiculous lawsuit complaints and structures ever. There's some underlying, like the Sherman Act, I believe it is, and some precedent stuff that works in its favor. I'm not denying it, but the way all of this is written is just so infuriating, and I'm honestly not surprised that whoever wrote this shit also is now producing stuff like this, that are saying that Apple, one of the US most important companies, is stifling innovation because green bubbles.
No matter how powerful, no matter how prominent, no matter how popular, no company is above the law. Through today's action, we reaffirm our unwavering commitment to this principle. And with that, I'll hand it off to the Acting Associate Attorney General, Ben Meister.
Oh my God, he let her talk for 40 seconds. I guess the man has to speak now.
Thank you, Deputy Attorney General Monaco.
He has an interesting voice.
The Attorney General's and the Deputy Attorney General's thanks to the leadership and staff of the Antitrust Division for all their extraordinary work in promoting competition and advancing economic opportunity. The landmark Microsoft case held a monopolist liable under the antitrust laws for leveraging its market position to undermine technologies that would have made it easier for users to choose different computer operating systems. Today's complaint alleges that Apple has engaged in many of the same tactics used. The complaint describes how Apple's anti-competitive conduct discourages developers from offering new and innovative applications and makes it more difficult for consumers to switch to other smartphones. Apple's conduct leaves consumers with higher prices, fewer new products, and a worse user experience. In this way, today's complaint also reflects the broader importance of vigorous antitrust enforcement. Markets that lack competition shift power from consumers and workers to powerful corporations.
Oh my God. Oh my God. What do workers have anything to do with this? Like, believe me, guys, as I've said before, I'm a social democrat, slightly even democratic socialist. I do believe in the power of workers. Workers have absolutely nothing to do with this. This idea, this is taking power away from consumers and workers, is bullshit. Yeah. Apple is increased, but through restrictions, there's a lot of virtue signaling. Higher prices. Why did I write it that way? Higher prices, fewer choices, lower quality, I guess, right?
It means fewer choices and higher prices for consumers. It means fewer options. And it means that the owners of powerful corporations make more without expanding the size of the pie for anyone else.
If only you had taxation laws to regulate how much top earners have to give back by default, even regardless of what the company allows.
Promoting competition through antitrust enforcement levels that playing field and is critical to promoting economic opportunity and equity. The department has been and remains committed to pursuing these goals wherever anti-competitive conduct arises. We have successfully challenged mergers that would lead to
Okay, I have no idea what happened with this video. I guess it's because it's a live stream and their internet is probably worse than that of any major streamer.
higher ticket prices and fewer flight options for travelers. Earlier this month,
those are
JetBlue and Spirit announced that they were abandoning their proposed merger, a major victory for Americans who rely on competition between airlines to travel affordably. We have also weighed in on important cases affecting how much American families pay for housing, explaining why it is unlawful for landlords to collude to raise rental prices even when AI technology.
Yeah, all of those things, by the way, like mergers, collusion between like landowners and landlords, like those are things that are explicit antitrust laws. And mergers, by the way, it's not this Department of Justice, right, that allowed the WhatsApp mergers, the Facebook mergers, right, the major stuff. But yeah, it's still stuff that you did allow to go through. Apple is not asking to merge with anyone. Apple is not colluding with anyone. Apple is just powerful enough by themselves.
Is used to do that. And we have prioritized criminal antitrust enforcement, cracking down on bid rigging and fraud schemes that victimize federal, state, and local governments. And ultimately,
all of that has nothing to do with Apple. This is basically just padding your resume so you can eventually take his job.
These are just a few recent examples of the work that the Antitrust Division and the department more broadly has done to ensure that the American
and I support most of the other work.
Will have equal opportunity in the marketplace. Today's suit against Apple reflects our continued commitment to promoting competition and advancing economic justice. I'll now turn it over to Assistant Attorney General Jonathan Cantor.
Oh my God, how many people will like...
Good morning.
How many bland white people will it take to accuse Apple? Are they competing with Apple's board when it comes to whiteness?
I'd also like to acknowledge Principal Deputy for the Antitrust Division, Doha Meki, Deputy Assistant Attorney General Hedel Doshi, and Deputy Assistant Attorney General Michael Kiedis.
What a bootlicker.
The Department of Justice has an enduring legacy of taking on the biggest and toughest monopolies in history. This includes
Will there be more data here, or is it just them?
AT&T, and Microsoft. Today, we add to that distinguished legacy by announcing an antitrust lawsuit against Apple.
Oh my God, how slow does he speak? I'm at 1.25.
The Department of Justice, the State Attorneys General, announced a case against a different platform monopolist. That successful litigation and remedy created opportunities for the next generation of technologies.
By the way, the Microsoft lawsuit is widely considered to have been extremely unsuccessful on the broader market. It has somewhat leveled the playing field for browsers, right? I believe this is what he is referring to, the Internet Explorer case. And yes, it technically opened up the market to like other browsers, and then Google came in and won and was never punished for basically the same monopolistic practices, like making their own popular services run best on Chrome and stuff like that, right? So this is the problem with the DOJ, right? They're not working on principal law. They are working on basically whatever comes to their attention. The problem with that is usually that you attack one at the behest of others, and then the others pick up a little bit of the market share from this one, but the market itself gets never solved because you didn't like create like actual legal precedent and certainly not new law. You basically just talked about certain things that the company in this position can do badly. But like if like a Steam comes to the iPhone, right, and still asks for a 30% commission and still has like contractual restrictions and fees, right, and still doesn't allow like super apps or something like that, was it all solved because of that?
Including and especially Apple. 25 years ago, it would have been difficult to imagine the innovation that would follow from the proliferation of mobile devices and services.
But Apple
That
was
historic
instrumental to that proliferation. iPods with iTunes, right? iPhone and the App Store. iPad continuing on the legacy of both macOS and iPad and iPhone OS in many ways. Then Apple Watch that works with iPhone. AirPods that work with any Bluetooth device, but primarily with the iOS ecosystem. And Apple Silicon Macs that were able to benefit from the long-standing development work that was done for iPhone, iPad, iOS, the App Store, Metal API in general, and stuff like that. All of those things are not like this idea that the market has stalled for some reason. By the way, higher prices, I would really like to see their arguments for that. The iPhone 10 costs $999. The iPhone 15 Pro starts at $999. We can argue about the 15 Pro Max with its $1199 starting price point. Given inflation, it's still lower than the $1099 XS Max. So yeah, it's such a weird argument. A lot of it is not backed up by actual facts, unless they're suggesting that prices should have gone down significantly, even though the bill of materials for iPhones has objectively only increased over the years. It's a very weird point to be
antitrust
making.
case, however, played a pivotal role in ushering the next generation of technologies. Apple itself was a significant beneficiary, and the remedy paved the way for Apple to launch iTunes, iPod, and eventually the iPhone, free from anti-competitive restrictions.
There are no competitive restrictions to launching a smartphone these days. You probably would have to run Android because Android is what people are used to, but if you have the money and the resources and if you can convince enough developers, which would take another Google, right? Even Microsoft failed to do so. This has nothing to do with anti-competitive practices by Apple or Google. It has everything to do with consumer choice. Fact is that similar to how like during the Cold War we had like a duopoly of power basically between like the United States and Western powers and the Soviet Union and other like communist powers, communist with like this. People tend to like basically bipolar solutions. It's like the United States has sort of choice when it comes to party, like they do have the Green Party and whatever, but primarily you do have the choice between two parties, and one wins, which at that point means it has some sort of a monopoly on power with some checks and balances, and the other one loses with obviously some kind of comeback potential during the midterms or whatever. Like, and the same goes for Apple. Apple will sometimes hold 52% market share, sometimes 40% market share. Then you have to calculate it against the world, where it sometimes has like 5% market share, like India, or 15% market share, like the European Union. Like, you cannot just say Apple is big, therefore bad.
Excessive fees and retaliation. Today we stand here once again to protect competition and innovation for the next generation of technology.
Nod.
Smartphones have so
blink.
revolutionized American life that it can be hard to imagine a world beyond the one that Apple, a self-interested monopolist, deems, and I quote,
Oh my god, like, bro, this is the single largest taxpayer in the United States, depending on the year. It can vary. Like, Apple, calling Apple a self-interest, by those people, my god, if Apple invests like every penny they have into like lobbying the government to get rid of those people, I wouldn't be angry with Apple. Those are insane attack points. He's basically saying, oh, because of our lawsuit against Microsoft, which, by the way, Macs predate Windows, so I have no idea what he means. Like, Apple was free to launch iPod and iTunes. For one, Windows was always an open operating system where you can run an app like iTunes. Your laws had shit to do with that, your antitrust cases. And then iPod by itself was a somewhat restrictive device that required iTunes, but it needed to require iTunes because at that point, obviously, it didn't have the smarts by itself.
Good enough, close quote. But under our system of antitrust laws, good enough is quite simply not enough. The law mandates that competition, and not Apple's self-interested business strategies alone,
good enough
deliver innovation and choice.
Is not enough.
This is particularly
what an
important
awesome
in areas of the
oxymoron,
economy
but
that impact our daily lives.
I mean, I
It is
get
hard
to,
to
I
think
mean,
of
know what
a
he
product that is
says.
more essential to our daily lives than smartphones. Competition does not just protect the markets and technologies of today.
Oh my God! Like like this, you can note, by the way, that Biden has nothing to do with the DOJ. I know a lot of people like say that because of Trump, but like Biden would have never allowed this. Biden would have said, bro, you're attacking one of the largest US companies, one of the largest US taxpayers, a company that is largely like pro-Democrat right now, and you fucking attack them in the most vicious terms, and you have no respect for the technological contributions they have done for the market. And instead of trying to say that the argument that they should be making is because of Apple's size, because of Apple's market share, because of Apple's profit margins, Apple should be forced to give up bigger portions of its pie to other people. That's also not quite a legal argument, more of a moral argument, but the idea that Apple built itself as a monopoly over 15 years after launching the iPhone, while the iPhone stayed like a minority market share in most regions of the world, while the Mac stayed kept a minority market share basically everywhere in the world. Even the iPad, which is like the most successful tablet on the market, does not really go above 35-40% market share, doesn't capture a majority. Like, oh God.
But the innovations of tomorrow. We bring this case to make sure that Apple competes by innovating rather than imposing rules and fees that prevent others.
This will feed so many bullshit. This reminds me of the Israel-Palestine case in the ICJ. This is even like the way they use the Tim Cook quote. This is such garbage, I want to say lawyer work, but it's legal work.
Innovating and competing too.
Oh, this bumps me
and in
out.
doing so, we protect the market for the innovations that we can't yet perceive. Alongside our colleagues at the State Attorneys General, we have conducted a methodical, thorough, and extensive investigation that has uncovered a pattern of anti-competitive conduct by Apple. Our lawsuit sets forth extensive facts and includes substantial excerpts from Apple's own internal documents. Our lawsuit explains Apple's long-standing pattern of harmful anti-competitive behavior. And Apple has inflicted competitive behavior, anti-competitive harm that is acute and substantial. For example, Apple's conduct has resulted in less competition to lower the price of smartphones for American consumers. Consumers are paying more as a result for digital goods.
By the way, that is not true. For one, the iPhone is at its cheapest in the United States, which already is mind-boggling. And then, as I've said before, US restrictions on Chinese companies are far more detrimental to choice and especially price than anything they mentioned about Apple. By the way, all of those things, like a 30% commission rate, like restrictions on apps, this allows Apple to make a banger buck in services that they then don't need to charge you upfront in hardware. Like Apple has, oh my god, these people understand nothing of technology and people actually using stuff. Those are all talking points by companies, not by consumers.
And subscriptions. Smartphone users are losing out on new, innovative, and more secure features
Like
that reduce
what?
the need for expensive hardware,
Like what?
unlock major technological advances, and allow for more secure communications.
No.
Developers, artists,
the apps exist.
content creators are paying hefty fees as Apple gains more control over the creation and distribution of content.
I mean, that is not true. Like, the App Store has had the same rules since 2008. And Apple is not in the content distribution. I guess you could argue that like the commission that they would then ask from YouTube and other services. But by the way, that commission can be negotiated. Like Amazon, for example, only pays 15%. As I said, if you have a long running subscription, like over 12 months with a consumer, that a commission also goes down to 15%. And over time, Apple has introduced multiple types of things that are exempt from the commission. Now, we can argue that some of those things should be expanded upon, but my God, this is such
Banks and credit unions are now paying new credit card fees for every tap-to-pay transaction initiated from an iPhone in retail stores and businesses.
Yes, so they do with Google.
These fees, the U.S. economy, billions of dollars.
What is up with this video? Did I skip?
These fees,
These
economy,
fees?
the U.S. economy,
Okay, this is
billions of dollars. Apple has long relied on contractual restrictions rather than competition on the merits to fortify its monopoly power. We know this because Apple's internal documents tell us as much.
No, Apple's internal documents tell you that they want to keep their own shit exclusive to themselves because it helps them sell hardware. This is not a monopolistic practice. This is a consideration. Like, this is an internal company consideration. It's like keeping your own, like, motor for your new car exclusive.
In 2010, a senior Apple executive emailed the then CEO of Apple about an ad for a new Kindle reader.
What?
The ad began with a woman using on a Kindle app.
Oh yeah, this is that why he smiled? Because yes, this is here. In 2010, a top Apple executive emailed Apple's then CEO Tim Cook about an ad for the new Kindle e-reader. Yeah, this is basically what word for word now. Wow, they really went to the Apple is too expensive talking point. It's not even remotely true when Samsung launches a $1299 Galaxy S24 Ultra.
She then switches to using an Android smartphone and continues to read her books using the same app.
Yet the same works on iPhone.
The senior executive at Apple expressed his concerns in candid terms. And I quote, "Message that can't be missed is that it is easy to switch from iPhone to Android.
Yeah.
Not fun to watch." Close quote.
Yeah. That's supposed to be your business MO. What are you saying? Like, it's supposed to be difficult to switch from one car to the next. Not because the other car cannot drive, but because you want to offer features that somebody else does not, and because you don't want to maybe rely on the same shit that somebody else does, right? If you, for example, have to buy a motor from like one of the big ones to make your own car, but then somebody can get the same motor on another car, right? You have to find some other argument. With Apple, it is like, look, we know that some of the other apps make it easy to move around from one OS to the other. We are not going to, by the way, stop this. They have not since then restricted Kindle to only use like iPhone specific purchases on iPhones, which, by the way, for example, consoles do when it comes to stuff like Fortnite V-Bucks. Like, this is their mindset. Of course, this is what a competitive mindset is supposed to look like. Like, what do you want? Do you want them to say like, oh, it's so easy? Like, this is this is what I believe when it comes to virtue signaling. This is when we are forgetting how people actually work, right? And this is, for example, why I'm a big advocate for political correctness, in the sense that you properly address people, you treat people with respect. But where I'm entirely against political correctness is like a mandated form of like not making jokes and shit like that, right? To me, there's a base level of interaction, and to me that would be Apple's basic terms and services, where they're like, okay, you know what, some of it is restricted, some of it is open, because obviously we cannot completely isolate ourselves from the rest, right? But internally, I want everyone to have that hatred against the other companies. I want Apple to secretly want to burn down Microsoft or Google, and the other way around, because I do want to have the best products that each of them can deliver. I don't want just a product that is a mishmash of every other product. I want a vision. Like this to me is such an insane insult, and it's so disrespectful to the people who have put in insane work to make the iPhone what it is, to make even Android what it is.
Apple was clear.
What I was trying to say, like with the political correctness, is like political correctness by itself in your interactions with people and stuff like that is 100% absolutely needed. We want to be treated with respect and stuff like that. But when it comes to actually like being free and open, as long as you are not cruel to anybody, I want people to be able to make jokes. I want people to be open about their opinions, because that gives us opportunity to change somebody else's opinion. I want Apple to have their own opinion about how their own stuff runs. I want them to not like Kindle ads that work like this. I want Phil Schiller and Steve Jobs to have conversations about porting iMessage or not. I want that. I don't want this. People who clearly don't understand technology, basically in like a political correctness and super nice and aren't we like holding hands and jumping under a rainbow together way, saying that the terms that Apple has been introduced since 2008, when they were like 1/100th the size that they are right now, are now like crossing the threshold, not because good argument, Apple's revenue, Apple's profit, Apple's overall market share, but because Apple bad, because they have increased their monopolistic hold. That is simply not true. That's not how the iPhone works.
Its response to this competitive threat. Apple would, and I quote, force, close quote, developers into using Apple's payment system. As we allege in our lawsuit,
I mean, yeah, they want people to use your payment system for apps on your platform. You can still use the Kindle app on other devices.
Apple repeatedly responded to competitive threats like this one by making it harder to leave than making it more attractive to stay.
That is not like harder to leave and more attractive to stay are like, that is your perspective. Like, did Apple make it harder to leave by not porting iMessage? Sure, but why should have Apple been forced to put in work to make another operating system better and then put in a free messaging service that they then have to run through their cloud and not use that service to actually, like, you don't have, like, Telegram works as a messenger because a billionaire decided to fund it, right? Signal works because it's relatively small. WhatsApp works because Facebook loves any kind of data, even if it's just like some phone numbers and anything, and they don't want anybody else to hold your data. Like, Apple has no incentive to make a cross-platform messaging app because, for one, you cannot really monetize messengers. Like, people thought that WhatsApp would be monetized at some point. It never did because people simply weren't willing to pay, and like, Apple obviously cannot run a Patreon or anything for that. So why would they put that burden on themselves? It's the same shit as with Beeper, right? Like, why should Beeper be allowed to give you iMessages on a platform that Apple doesn't support, create more run on Apple's cloud, without giving Apple a penny. That's entirely antitrust, because this is completely against one company's rights to control its own IP and its own basically like services, devices, apps, whatever you want to call it, that they sell to you.
The antitrust laws have something to say about that. In closing, I would like to thank the unbelievably hardworking, dedicated, talented, and extremely awesome staff of the Antitrust Division, many of whom are in the back. They are
I hope they lose so hard and then lose their fucking jobs. This is incredibly overstated. Like, you can make like lawsuits, you can make cases while still being respectful to like the side you're attacking. They've not once like accepted Apple's historical contributions from like the original Mac, or from even like the Apple One to the original Mac, to Apple's proliferation of mouse and keyboard user interfaces, to the to iPod and iTunes. In fact, they gave themselves the credit those for iTunes and iPod because of their lawsuit, which I assume they meant the Microsoft lawsuit, because they at some point like didn't really say that out loud. Instead of talking about like, look, Apple is a great company, a historic contributor to tech, a major taxpayer, but we believe with how big Apple has gotten, Apple needs to cut down on those things, because those things are hurting current companies. They're hurting the potential for price and option competition. And we believe that in the future, they will prevent new innovations from rising up. Let's, by the way, forget the fact that the current most major innovations are happening in AI, and Apple is doing jack shit to prevent any of that, nor did Apple prevent anything crypto related from being spun up, or NFT related from being spun up, which, by the way, those are not innovations, those are bullshit. But Jesus, those people don't understand tech.
Public servants, and I am so proud every day to call them colleagues. I would also like to and their incredible teams from Arizona, California, Connecticut, District of Columbia, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York.
Yeah, basically
North Dakota,
all Democratic
Oklahoma,
states, like
Oregon,
Oklahoma,
Tennessee,
okay.
Vermont.
Wait, is
and
Oklahoma
Wisconsin.
Democratic? I'll have
Finally,
to look it up.
I extend our deepest gratitude to the U.S. Attorney and his extraordinary team from the District of New Jersey. Join us in filing this important and historic case.
Oklahoma.
It's a great privilege now to turn the podium over to the Attorney General from the great state of New Jersey.
2020 election.
Good morning.
Oh, I know
I'm
that
honored
guy. He wants to
stand
run for
here
higher
today
office at
alongside
some
Attorney
point.
General Garland, Deputy Attorney General Monaco, Acting Associate Attorney General Miser, and Assistant Attorney General Cantor, and the rest of the Department of Justice.
Oh yeah,
and
Oklahoma
9.3
voted
million
for
residents of the
Trump.
state of New Jersey,
Of course
and
it
a
did. It's
bipartisan group
Oklahoma.
of 16
Why was it
attorneys
even?
general. Because no matter which great state we represent, we are all responsible for protecting the well-being of our residents. And that
Guys,
includes their
I'll be
economic well-being.
going to
As we've
1.5
heard,
because
we're
I
here
want
today
to
because
get it
Apple
over
has
with.
consistently and deliberately engaged in anti-competitive business practices designed to profits for their shareholders while minimizing the ability of consumers to switch to a competitor or to otherwise cut their costs. I'd wager that just about everyone in this room and everyone watching this press conference has a smartphone. And nearly 7 of every 10 smartphones are iPhones. That's not an
Speaking of
accident.
Apple doing nothing on AI, did you already talk about Apple supposedly using Google's Gemini? No, as I said before, my week has been like freaking torturous, and I finally got to relax a little bit, and then I decided to do the stream, which I guess became more torture for me. No, I have not talked about it because, quite honestly, I don't know what you think about it, right? The Apple Gemini usage, or whatever they would use, because Google changes their names for every kind of service every 5 minutes. My suspicion is that if Apple relies in any way on Microsoft or Google for their AI stuff, the reason for that will actually have less to do with their AI and more with their search capabilities, right? Because what Apple is missing right now is some kind of pipeline that gives you information directly from that basically needs to be searched up, right? in the way that this data is then analyzed by AI and presented to you, we can argue we don't know how good Apple's large language models are thus far, and whether they can do like stuff like website summaries very well and things like that. I assume that basically everything that can run on device will run on device. I would think that in improvements to keyboards and text predictions would run on device and would be powered by Apple's own large language models, which they already are, but we would be talking about a next gen version. I would strongly believe that whatever AI features Apple introduces to the Photos app would be powered by Apple's own AI stuff. And it's then when it comes to stuff like blah blah blah, can you give me information on this and that historic figure, and then she gives you like a Wikipedia thing, and then you ask more precisely, can you tell me when they did that, this and that, and what the historical consensus on that is. And I would believe that either this is where Apple completely hands off to Gemini or ChatGPT, or that Apple only uses Bing or Google to actually get the information, but then presents it to you through their own AI.
Rather than compete on an even playing field, Apple has stifled innovation in order to gain total control of the iPhone software ecosystem. As a result, dependent on Apple and its products and find the process of switching phones exceedingly costly and complex. The company has created a marketplace in which developers, consumers, and others must play only by rules established by Apple for Apple.
And for consumers, which are largely more happy with iPhone than with any other smartphones.
2016, the company announced that it had sold 1 billion iPhones, a number that continues to climb. When that milestone was reached, Apple CEO Tim Cook said iPhone become more than a constant companion. The iPhone is truly an essential part of our daily life, end quote. That dependence was no accident. Apple made the iPhone a part of our daily life by limiting the features and functionality that developers could offer iPhones.
No, that is 100% a lie. He's not talking about iPhones. Oh my God, they're doing the same clip chimping misquoting as in the ICJ case. Oh my God, he's saying that basically all smartphones are that essential, but iPhone is our smartphone, so this is why I'm talking about iPhone. Tim Cook wouldn't be talking like, oh my God, this is why Apple does not talk about tablets are important to kids to play around with. They talk about how kids like iPads because it's their tablet they sell. It's why Samsung says the next big thing is another Galaxy, even there exists a Xiaomi phone already with the same features, with their argument being, it's our next big thing. We're not supposed to advertise other companies to you.
And by selectively controlling access between apps and the iPhone operating system. As we note in the complaint, Apple protects its business model by restricting technologies that would make it easier for iPhone customers to switch to another smartphone.
Okay, so I get it. Main point is switching is hard, right? Am I reading this correctly? Like they've said basically that like the price is high not because other phones are expensive, but because iPhones are expensive and you won't buy other smartphones, right? So this is like switching is hard, right? They're not actually talking about like Apple directly like Apple already competes with those other companies, but like with basically everything nowadays also being subscriptions and available cross-platform, being it games or any kind of like Netflix style app, there's actually less and less that holds you back with iPhone. I mean, sure, you can argue, well, an Android phone won't have iBooks, right? But yeah, again, Apple is allowed to keep software and services for themselves to sell their hardware because Apple fundamentally is a hardware company.
Go to the core of Apple's unlawful conduct. And the end result is that you pay more money for an inferior product. As New Jersey's attorney to protect the rights of consumers in my state and ensure that businesses treat them fairly.
This is so incredibly insulting. You pay more money for an inferior product because we said so. Like, let us, like, what? Will they now be making arguments that the regular iPhone 15 should have ProMotion? Will they copy every tech nerd argument?
No matter how large or powerful they are.
By the way, I don't want to get highly political, but if you ever doubt why companies, even the best of them, even the most liberal and most like left-leaning of them, don't like left-leaning governments, it's because of this. It's not because they don't like actual laws. It's not because they refuse to engage with any kind of antitrust. Plenty of companies are fine with having some regulations. In the end, like, look at the tobacco lobbies, right? They trim down those laws enough so they don't destroy them. But they've also over time just got people to pay higher prices, and they're fine. Like with this, if you are Apple, right, you can say a lot about Apple, right? And some of it is correct. As I said, like, for example, the Apple Watch stuff compatibility, you can like it or not. It's an objective fact that Apple could, after all those years, have introduced some kind of backdoor for iPhone, for Android Wear or whatever it's called these days, for Wear OS Watch to work nicely with iPhone. Okay. But like, none of this is actual law. You're just making shit up as if consumers are asking for it. Consumers are largely happier on iPhone than basically any other smartphone brand. Macs make consumers happier than basically any other computer.
And that's what my fellow attorneys general do every day on behalf of their residents. Monopolies are the antithesis, and thanks to the actions like we are taking today.
Federal Trade Commission suing Amazon and Facebook. What does it say to you? Those are four of the greatest American business success stories of modern history. What does it say to you that they're all accused of illegal, anti-competitive behavior? And if you can indulge me in an off-topic question.
I trust one first.
Wow, a very smart question. How do you feel that basically your office is attacking every single large U.S. company?
Maybe I'll have more success with that one. I don't know. Look, Justice Department does not have a different rule for the powerful as compared to the powerless. Does not have
No, of course you do. That is not the point. Antitrust actually matters way more, and so it should for large companies, because this is where you can abuse your market. Like, yeah, you can argue that a landlord can abuse his power on like an individual level with like some apartments, but the problem has way more to do with like landlord collusion at that point, if you're talking when the government gets involved, right? Like, no, antitrust specifically needs to target bigger companies. That is fine. You're not making the point, though. You should be making the point that it's Apple's revenue and profit and market share that makes them bad. Not because deals that have existed since 2008 are evil.
different rules.
You stupid, dumb fucks.
We look at the facts, we look at the law, we make the appropriate determinations. I will say that with respect to resource allocation, when you have an institution with lots of resources, that in our view is harming the American economy and the American people, it's important for us to allocate our resources to protect the American people. And that is certainly the case where individual Americans have no ability to protect themselves.
In first report, you personally have come in for a lot of criticism, in particular from the White House, anonymous officials, who say that you should have acted to keep him from characterizing the president's memory the way he did.
Okay, now we're getting into really political stuff. By the
When
way, I agree, but
lawyer for the president. I sincerely
The language that he used to characterize the president's mental state.
look. I said from the very beginning that I would make public the report of the special regis. It's consistent. The idea that an attorney general would edit or
He's come on saying that potentially the DOJ could also have iPads or other parts of Apple's business. So I was curious if you could explain to us why focus specifically on smartphones at this moment in time, and whether the DOJ remains open to potentially broaden this challenge against Apple, given also the argument that this alleged misconduct actually has ripple effects across the economy.
well, our general practice is not to discuss matters that we have not announced, and so I don't know or whether we're announcing them or not. So I won't answer the latter part of your question. On the first part of the question, I think our complaint explains why we're focused on the iPhone. It's the exclusionary conduct by Apple to maintain its monopoly and consequences for innovation, prices, and the effect on both consumers, developers.
I guess
and credit
iPads,
card
Apple
companies.
Watch would
I
be
know
like
Mr.
the
Kemper,
main
say
culprits
anything else
here.
just to add to that.
Thank you, Attorney General. We focus on the core monopoly in this complaint. Apple's core monopoly is in the iPhone, and we focus on the conduct that Apple's engaged in to legally maintain its monopoly in the iPhone. And that relates to the entire iPhone ecosystem. And we've provided extensive detail about practices across a broad range of services and features throughout the iPhone ecosystem that have contributed to legally maintaining Apple's monopoly power.
Dave Michaels from the Wall Street Journal. The government's not the first plaintiff to accuse Apple of anti-competitive conduct, so could you explain why you think the government is better positioned here to prosecute a successful case, including why this is a viable case in spite of the fact that Apple mostly beat the case that Epic Games filed against Apple?
Oh, nice.
And then, finally, do you think your lawsuit will ultimately lead to lower fees in the App Store for developers and consumers?
Look, the United States normally wins the cases that it brings. We bring cases because we believe the facts and law justify them, and because we believe that we are likely to win those cases. Now, I'll let Mr. Cantor again explain any further that he'd like.
What kind
Attorney General,
of division of
our case,
labor
as I
do you
mentioned
have,
before,
guys?
Focuses on Apple's core monopoly, which is the iPhone. We have focused on a pattern of conduct over a decade that Apple's engaged in order to reinforce its monopoly power by excluding.
How did
rivals.
Apple have this is the word monopoly is so misused here. The iPhone itself is not a monopoly. They are talking about the App Store being a monopoly of for app distribution on iPhone. So it's a subset. Oh God. This is exactly Tim Sweeney talking points. This guy has poisoned the discourse about technology so much.
Including technologies and stifling any specificity in our cases that have been brought elsewhere.
Yeah, he's saying the same
There's
shit.
already a member of Congress this morning in response to this lawsuit saying that if Apple can't vet the apps that are sold on its platform, it opens the door to apps made in China and Russia and other adversaries, if you will, from getting onto people's phones. How would you
Good
respond to that
point.
criticism?
I'll just say in general, and once again, I'm going to go to Mr. Cantor for the specifics. This lawsuit is not aimed at every kind of vetting or other activity that Apple does with respect to the App Store.
Okay, so this is not a site loading law. You should have said that sooner, bro. Lawsuit not aimed at every kind of vetting. I believe it's written like that. I should really refresh. I have a C2 Cambridge English certificate. I should really know how to write this. Lawsuit not aimed at every kind of vetting that Apple does with the App Store. Interesting. So it's not a lawsuit basically asking for site loading, which makes some of the claims here absolutely insane.
It is aimed at exclusionary conduct. Fourth in the complaint, there are many things that
Josephat, thank you for the 199. Very, very much appreciated, man.
of that exclusionary conduct that do not help security, and in fact some that actually harm security. So I'm going to leave it to Mr. Cantor to describe this in more specifics.
Thank you, Attorney General. Privacy and security are extremely important values. Competition makes devices and services more private and more secure.
That is not true. Apple is the main competitor that focuses on privacy and security. The rest does not. Facebook and Google specifically, which one runs the largest mobile operating system in the world, the other runs the largest social network in the world, actually go against that and actually hate Apple for that. For the toll you're taking on your health. Yeah, man. It's the combination of coke and streaming and screaming in the streaming. It's very much appreciated, man. Thank you.
Our complaint explains very
Josephat, where are you from? I don't think I ever asked because it's dollars. Kind of assumed. I guess it's kind of racist for me to assume that with your name you aren't from the United States or Canada or something. But that has everything to do with the fact that my clientele, the people actually watching my videos, are mostly from India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, which I have no idea how that ever played out with the algorithm. So I was just curious.
clearly, while the legal exclusionary conduct that Apple has engaged in is not necessary to protect privacy, while the illegal and exclusionary conduct that Apple has engaged in is not necessary to in fact, as the Attorney General mentioned, our complaint explains that in many instances, Apple's conduct has made its ecosystem less private and less secure.
That is, oh wow. Oh my God, this Apple will destroy this claim. Apple's conduct has made its ecosystem less private and less secure. That is 100% a lie. I have you're from Mexico. Yeah, makes sense. And I guess plenty of people with your last name would also be living in the United States. Oh, actually, great to have. What time is it at your place, man? Okay, is it over? Okay, we are over with this bullshit. I skipped over some of the more political stuff with like the Trump stuff, and I skipped over where they like went overboard with repeating the same bullshit. And now for the end, because I do want to get into this, I do want to get into the complaint while my voice is still there. And I highly encourage anybody who is still watching, which we were at like 6-7 people, we're now at 2 or 3, to see if anything actually interests you, if you think that maybe my reaction is overboard, if you think that my voice is maybe not to your liking. It's East Coast time for you. Okay, so I guess it's then 6 hours earlier for you or something like that, 6 or 7 hours. So it's 3 p.m., I guess. So, complaint. In 2010, a top Apple executive emailed Apple's then CEO, which at that point was Steve Jobs. Or was that one of its time when he was sick? I don't actually know. It depends on when the email was sent. In 2010, a top Apple executive emailed Apple's then CEO about an ad for the new Kindle e-reader. The ad began with a woman who was using her iPhone to buy and read books on the Kindle app. She then switches to an Android smartphone and continues to read her books using the same Kindle app. The executive wrote to Jobs, okay, so it was Steve, one message that can be missed is that it is easy to switch from iPhone to Android, not fun to watch. Jobs was clear in his response. Apple would force developers to use its payment system to lock in both developers and users on its platform. Does that say that? Because the force developers to use payment system, like the way it locks in users, it's not because you cannot actually buy stuff on other platforms. It has to do with you getting used to the convenience of using one payment system for all apps. Over many years, Apple has repeatedly responded to competitive threats like this one by making it harder or more expensive for its users and developers to leave them, by making it more attractive for them to stay. Are there footnotes or something like that? Maybe later. I don't like it. Like, I'm used to like more scientific work. This looks sloppy in comparison. So Apple has responded to competitive threats like this one repeatedly by making it harder or more expensive for its users and developers to leave, than by making it more attractive for them to stay. This is like completely just your opinion, bro. Like, for many years, Apple has built a dominant, like, you could have like at least, I don't know, gave a quotation, I guess, from some industry expert or something. For many years, Apple has built a dominant iPhone platform and ecosystem that has driven the company's astronomical valuation. Actually, Apple's valuation dropped by 3.5% to 4% today, thanks to this. At the same time, it has long understood that disruptive technologies and innovative apps, products, and services threaten that dominance by making users less reliant on iPhone or making it easier to switch to a non-Apple smartphone. By the way, Apple was doing those things when their market share was like super low. Like, it's not like Apple had like 60% market share and they were barely clinging on to that, and then they introduced a bunch of anti-competitive practices. The timeline just doesn't line up. Rather than respond to competitive threats by offering lower smartphone prices to consumers or better monetization for developers, Apple would meet competitive threats by imposing a series of shape-shifting rules and restrictions. Rules and restrictions change over time. As markets develop, as opinions change, and as law changes, it's calling it shape-shifting is like so pre-biased. Imposing a series of shape-shifting rules and restrictions in its App Store guidelines and developers agreement that would allow Apple to extract higher fees never happened. The fees have always been what they are. Thwart innovation, I guess this is stuff like cloud streaming apps, right? Offer a less secure or degraded user experience. This is when we get to green bubbles, but those have nothing to do with the App Store. And throttle competitive alternatives. Okay. It has deployed this playbook across many technologies, products, and services, including super apps, text messaging, smartwatches, and digital wallets, among many others. Apple conduct also stifles new paradigms that threaten Apple's smartphone dominance, including the cloud, which could make it easier for users to enjoy high-end functionality on a lower-priced smartphone. Again, this has been fixed. Why is this still in the lawsuit? Or make user device agnostic altogether, which, yes, they are a hardware company. They don't want that. As one Apple manager recently observed, imagine buying an Android for $25 at a garage sale and it works fine, and you have a solid cloud computing device. Imagine how many cases like that there are. Yes, and Apple's argument is we have better hardware than this cloud, basically. Like, yeah, you won't be able to play like all AAA games in the way that you could through the cloud, but cloud introduces latency. Cloud has even higher requirements for solid internet connection. Cloud makes it more difficult with stuff even like your local photo library. So yes, while it is a stupid, by the way, quote to do, it's not a statement overall about Apple's broader case for why iPhones are good. Simply put, Apple feared the disintermediation of its iPhone platform, what a word, and undertook a course of conduct that locked in users and developers while protecting its profits. Critically, Apple's anti-competitive conduct not only limits competition in the smartphone market, but also reverberates through the industries that are affected by these restrictions, including financial services, fitness, gaming, social media, news media, entertainment, and more. Unless Apple's anti-competitive and exclusionary conduct is stopped, it will likely extend and entrench its iPhone monopoly to other markets and parts of the economy. For example, Apple is rapidly expanding its influence and growing its power in the automotive. They just canceled the Apple Car, and CarPlay is a very small part of the larger automotive puzzle. Content creation, they have their own TV and movie streaming service. They didn't even buy any large studio. And entertainment. Oh, okay, I guess content would be more entertainment and content creation would be more stuff like YouTube, right? And financial services industries, this is when we get back to Apple Wallet, and often by doing so in exclusionary ways that further reinforce and deepen the competitive moat around the iPhone. This is extremely emotionally charged language. This sounds super, super non-professional. This case is about freeing smartphone markets from Apple's anti-competitive and exclusionary conduct and restoring competition to lower smartphone prices for consumers. Reducing fees for developers, this is a Tim Sweeney thing where he tots his 12% commission instead of Apple's 30%. And preserving innovation for the future. The US and the states of New Jersey, Arizona, California, Connecticut, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New York, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Oregon, Tennessee, Vermont, Wisconsin, and the District of Columbia, acting by and through their respective attorneys general, bring this case to address Apple's anti-competitive and exclusionary conduct and alleviate harm to competition, which is interesting because they talk more about competition than they actually talk about consumers, which is kind of how I don't expect US antitrust to work. Usually I feel like US antitrust forces more on pricing and the benefit to consumers. This seems very more European in their approach. Introduction. The Apple Computer Company, as it was then called, was founded in 1976 to make and market PCs. For its inception, Apple had a knack for expensive, high-end design and niche marketing relative to its competitors, but it struggled to compete against rivals that offered lower prices and more programs. After 2 decades, Apple struggled to compete against Windows personal computers, and by the late 1990s, it was on the brink of bankruptcy. Guys, I have written essays on Apple's history. This is asinine. this is like, for one, this does ignore how much Apple has actually contributed to personal computers. This does ignore the internal upheave with like the removal of Steve Jobs that actually led to their non-competitiveness. It ignores failures that Apple did in that time. It had nothing to do with their product being outright bad. It had to do a lot with like internal mismanagement. And yes, other rivals offered lower prices, for example, but like, yeah, and because their ecosystem was larger for stuff like Windows, those offered more programs at that point. But in the beginning, Apple offered more programs. Apple's fortunes changed around the time it launched the iPad in 2001. No, they changed around the time Apple introduced the iMac in 1998. The iMac was 1998, or was it? iMac first gen. Yeah, 1998. My knowledge is still uncontested. Innovative design and savvy marketing had been enough to drive a successful business strategy. Had not been enough to drive a successful business strategy. This time, the confluence of several factors made it a smash success. Apple's iTunes application allowed iPod users to organize their song library and update their iPod. A path-clearing antitrust enforcement case brought by the United States and state attorneys general against Microsoft opened the market and constrained Microsoft's ability to prohibit companies like Apple from offering iTunes on Windows PCs. That was not what the lawsuit was about in general, was it? Like, you could always install whatever app you wanted on Windows, pretty much. Licensing agreements with the major music labels allowed Apple to offer iPod/iTunes users a wide selection of music for a fee per download. For a fee per... Why does this have to be one word? It doesn't matter. The iPod experience gave Apple a recipe for the future. A high-end device. That is not true. The iPad was not a high-end device. There were plenty of cheap devices. Plenty of cheap iPod spin-offs, basically. A large number of platform participants, i.e. music labels and consumers, and a digital storefront. But that's not... The iPhone succeeded, not because of, like... The iPhone was unique in comparison to the iPod. Like, the participants for iPhone success were not the same. The digital storefront functioned differently. Like, those are extremely base level understandings that are pretty wrong. More importantly, it gave Apple a playbook, drive as many consumers and third-party participants to the platform. But the platform most people used iTunes on was Windows. To the platform is possible and offer a wide selection of content, products, and services created by those third parties to consumers. Why is any of that made look like it's a bad thing? This structure put Apple in the driver's seat to generate substantial revenues through device sales. In the first instance, no, the iPod was not super duper profitable. I mean, it sold in the tens of millions. That's what made it successful. But like, it was nowhere near as hardware profitable as the iPhone on average. And subsequently, the ancillary fees that it drives from sitting between consumers on the one hand and the products and services they love on the other. But the iPod was better because of that service. And both could only exist because the other existed. Apple's experience with the iPod set the stage for Apple. Like, look at Spotify. Spotify by itself as a company can barely exist. It doesn't matter if it has to pay a commission or not. It is not profitable. The reason why it succeeds is because it got reasonably successful in the stock market and basically keeps riding that high somewhat. At some point, the bills will come due. With this market trick or anything that Apple did here, Apple was able to, at some point, sell you cheap iPods and at any point sell you pretty cheap music because both of them helped each other. Apple's experience with the iPod set the stage for Apple's most successful product yet. In 2007, Apple launched the iPhone, a smartphone that offered high-end hardware and software application. No. Like, like the App Store launched a year later, but I guess it's all relative to those people, called Apps, built atop a mobile operating system. Not really, like Apple specifically even called it OS 10 at that point, but yes, it's a spin-off, so it's a mobile OS that mimicked the functionality and ease of a computer. Apple initially offered only a small number of apps that it created for iPhone, but Apple quickly realized the enormous value that a broader community of entrepreneurially innovative developers could drive to its user and the iPhone platform more broadly. So Apple invited and capitalized on the work of these third parties. You know that Apple put in the work too. They needed like servers to house this. They needed like workers to actually vet those apps. Their engineers and developers had to create APIs, so those apps had to perform well. Like, what? While maintaining control and monetizing that work for itself. The value of third parties' work served an important purpose for Apple. Indeed, as early as 2010, then CEO Steve Jobs discussed how to further lock customers into our ecosystem and make Apple's ecosystem even more sticky. 3 years later, Apple executives were still strategizing about how to get people hooked to the ecosystem. Those are not bad things. Also, the reason why Apple talks about the ecosystem is because by 2010 they were looking to either introduce the iPad or have already introduced the iPad. The ecosystem also talks about Macs, iPods, which at that point still existed, and iPhone. It's not about just furthering the success of iPhone, it's how to help each piece of new hardware be so good and each service be that attractive and sticky that other people will buy other hardware from them and then keep further locking themselves in by keeping using those services. The strategy paid off. Over more than 15 years, Apple has built and sustained the most dominant smartphone platform and ecosystem in the United States. So 15 years. So I guess BlackBerry and stuff like that, like they were successful up until like 2010 still relatively. I guess, I mean, it would still be then like at least 12 years where Apple has been dominant in the US. But then again, that is also not quite true. For years, Apple has also had lower market share than Android at some point, right? Maybe you can argue about the ecosystem, but like, what is Apple's like latest smartphone market share US? I'll just smartphone market share US. Let's see. Apple holds currently 60% of the market, which I assume with the fact that iPhones have better longevity than Android on average, that would mean that they're about correct by saying that 7 out of 10 iPhone phones are Android, are iPhone, right? Is there? How has it worked over the years? No, there's just a monthly perspective, US over the years. Yeah, since 2009 and 2023. Apple's market share is the gray one. So this is Apple's global market share, which is now at 24% US smartphone market share. Okay, so it has gone up and down depending on, it's hard to get all data that I would want. This is since 2012, so it has increased overall. Actually interesting. I should do more research about that, whenever it dropped or not, what were like the main culprits historically for that. But yeah, Apple currently right now has over 60% market share in the United States. Over more than 15 years, Apple has built and sustained the most dominant smartphone platform ecosystem in the US by attracting third-party developers of all kinds to create apps that users could download on their smartphones through a digital storefront called the App Store. As developers created more and better products, content, apps, and services, more people bought iPhones, which incentivized even more third parties to develop apps for the iPhone. Yes, that's called a virtuous cycle. Today, the iPhone's ecosystem includes products, apps, content, accessories, and services that are offered by content creators, newspaper publishers, banks, advertisers, social media companies, airlines, productivity developers, retailers, and other merchants, and others. As Apple's power grew, its leverage over third parties reinforced its tight control over how third parties innovate and monetize on and off the smartphone in ways that were anti-competitive and exclusionary. Today, Apple charges as much as $1,599 for an iPhone. What do you care? That is not what antitrust is about. It's like saying today Ford charges as much as $200,000 on that one. This is a 1 terabyte iPhone 15 Pro Max. You don't have to buy one. This is so stupid. And earns high margins on each one, more than double those of others in the industry. Ever considered that Apple has been able to grow and keep that kind of margin because their products are actually good and attractive in interesting ways that go beyond just offering cheap shit? When developers imagine a new product or service for iPhone consumers, Apple demands up to 30%. The up to ignores everything that I've said about exclusions for the 30% commission, the option to have 15% commission on long-running subscriptions, and 15% commissions for developers who make less than $1 million a year. Apple demands up to 30% of the price of an app that is also not like, it almost makes it sound like they're taking this directly from the developer, right? But Apple sets the prices there. You can choose your own price. Like if you want to make more money, you price your app higher, right? It's whose content, product, or services it did not create. That is also not quite true. The App Store houses monetization services. So that by itself would be like around 3% of that 30%. The App Store itself obviously costs Apple some money in upholding it, right? You have to have large servers, you have to have them worldwide, you have to have decent infrastructure for all that, for it all to work. Apple has to develop and deliver new APIs to developers and uphold old ones to make sure that the apps keep running as intended. Apple has to control apps, at least to a degree, to make sure that as few of them as possible are like crashing, bug-infested nightmares. So no, this idea that Apple did not have any hand in content, products, or services in that way is entirely untrue. Also, the extreme trust that people place in the App Store over even solutions like the Google Play Store, which work remarkably similarly, so this is a big thing that developers would easily pay to like for a disk distribution to a market, like paying 30% would be a dream send. Makes you wonder if Tim Sweeney is behind this. Well, he is, by poisoning the well. He isn't personally. I do have enough trust in like Merrick Garland to not like be bribed by Tim Sweeney or anything. But I think the poisonous discourse comes from two things. First is like this long lead up with stuff like Epic Games, which is ironic that they are feeling like they can run this case even though Apple won the Epic case. Which also, as I've noted here, lawsuit not aimed at every kind of vetting that Apple does with the App Store. So this is not like fully for side loading the way that Tim Sweeney would want it to be. Tim Sweeney is somewhat behind this. And the other thing is as I've mentioned here, it's virtue signaling, right? It's the idea that, we are like a somewhat left-leaning institution. They even said we are protecting workers here. There's a lot going on here beyond just Tim Sweeney. Then when a consumer wants to buy some additional service within that app, Apple abstracts up to another 30%. That depends heavily on the app itself. Again, for a service Apple does not create or develop. By the way, the reason why Apple charges 30% for in-app purchases, this is one of the most disingenuous things about the debate when people claim that platform holders should be prohibited from asking for 30% from in-app purchases, but it's fine to charge that for upfront cost. Because at that point, every app would turn into a subscription service, or into a freemium app, even more, because then there would be zero monetization, right? Like, this is bullshit. If an app is free, and if it, like, let's say a game is free and it has like V-Bucks, then Apple asking 30% on those V-Bucks is just as valid, and you can argue the validity is zero, but it's just as valid as Apple asking for 30% from the $5.99 or $4.99 that Infinity Blade used to cost on the App Store. So again, for a service that Apple does not create or develop, the reason for that is because this is a percentage. It's not a raw value. And especially if you start from an app that is potentially free, which then Apple hosts on the App Store, then of course they would have to have some kind of monetization here. Even Tim Sweeney does not make the argument that there should be zero monetization. When customers buy a coffee or pay for groceries, Apple charges a fee for every tap-to-pay transaction. Yes, if they use Apple Pay, right? You can still technically use like some alternatives with like barcodes and stuff, but I'll get that. I can see why some financial services wouldn't be in love with that. By the way, that tap to pay transaction is incredibly small. Most banks are more than happy to pay it so that they have higher engagement by consumers. It has been shown time and time again that consumers will pay more if they have a good tap to pay implementation that they trust. Imposing its own form of an interchange fee on banks, which, by the way, are also famous for asking for fees, and a significant new cost for using credit cards. Nope, it's not. It's not a significant cost. When users run an internet search, Google gives Apple a significant cut of the advertising revenue that an iPhone user... No, that is not true. They don't give them Apple the advertising revenue because they are forced to. They're giving Apple a cut of the advertising revenue because they're the default search engine. This does have nothing to do with regulations from the App Store, nor is any other search engine beholden to those deals. If you activate Bing on your iPhone, that does not mean that your search advertising revenue will now be split between Apple and Microsoft. No, Google voluntarily gives Apple that money because being the default search engine on Apple is very, very relevant to them. Because iPhones are so relevant. You can argue that that deal by itself, by the way, I agree that that deal is kind of iffy, but this deal has nothing to do with like when they say like 30%, App Store. This is literally nothing to do with those things. This is like a bilateral deal between Apple and Google. This is 100% wrong. Guys, I'll have to like get like myself like a nice PDF editor where I can like write like notes to this. Like I believe I can do this here, but I do like want something more professional because there's a lot of notes that I would want to add here. Apple keenly understands that while a community of devs and accessory makers is indispensable to the success of iPhone, they also pose an existential threat to its extraordinary profits by empowering consumers to think different. Okay, that sounds now like Tim Sweeney, to basically reuse a Steve Jobs quote, and choose perfectly functional, less expensive alternative smartphones. Like, bro, this has nothing to do with, like, perfectly functional. Like, you understand that the industries are not about perfectly functional. This isn't a bolt that you screw in somewhere. Like, this is about user choice. This is about a little bit about design, the preference for how the ecosystem looks and feels. Like, this isn't like a super utilitarian, like this is a Soviet Union understanding of smartphones, basically. It click, it calls, so therefore it's perfectly functional. That's not how users look at, like, there's a reason why everyone I know who like, basically everyone I know who over time, by finishing university and stuff like that and became a higher earner, switched to iPhone or at least got a Mac or something like that. It's because Apple products have a certain joie de vivre. They have an attraction. You can argue how much of that is marketing, which, by the way, like when I go back to like this, when they called out the iPod, right? They said like, Apple's IT against Apple's after 2 decades, Apple struggled against Windows personal computers, right? Here, innovative design and savvy marketing had not been enough to drive a successful business strategy, which I guess refers to the Mac, right? Like, who the fuck are you to say this? Plenty of companies experience struggle in the meantime. The Mac is now more successful than it's ever been, and it's a super open platform. This is super highly emotionally charged, which makes me emotionally charged. Apple's smartphone business at its core is one that invites as many participants, including iPhone users and third-party developers, to join its platform as possible while using as many as possible while using contractual terms to force these participants to pay substantial fees. At the same time, Apple restricts its platform's participants' ability to negotiate or compete down its fees. By the way, that is not true. Amazon did negotiate their App Store fee down, because they are powerful enough through alternative app stores, in-app payment processors, I guess. And I guess they are making the DMA case with this one. They're not even asking for full site loading, but they do have and more. In order to protect that model, Apple reduces competition in the markets for performance smartphones and smartphone generally. Who the fuck defines what a performance smartphone is? Like, is it because Apple advertises their processors? Is that why they decided that Apple plays in like the performance smartphone league? It does this by delaying, degrading, or blocking tech that would increase competition in the smartphone markets by decreasing barriers to switching to another smartphone, among other things. The suppressed technologies would provide a high-quality user experience on any smartphone, which would, like, why are there so little examples, right? Like, again, like I can attest that some of that is true. Like I said, that like digital wallets, I can understand why they would be like, well, if you have one credit card, right? Why do you need an intermediary? You didn't just install that credit card. Maybe you have to download one app from your bank and then you use it, tap to pay. I can see that, right? But they provide remarkably little examples here. I guess because a lot of it is super highly speculative. This is why they talked about stuff like protecting the innovations of tomorrow, right? They weren't even able to like properly like verbalize what they were talking about with cloud streaming apps. I assume some of that we'll find here, because that was sort of an innovation that was held back by Apple, and developers needed to use web apps. I have strongly opposed this decision in the sense that let me be perfectly clear. I have said Apple is free to make this regulation on the App Store. And as long as Apple provides an alternative, I'm okay with it. What I wasn't okay with in the beginning was when I thought that they wouldn't have like a web app thing, but web apps work pretty well for cloud streaming stuff. Regardless, I can at least see the arguments here, but like they provide so few examples here. Jesus, in order to protect substantial fees. The suppressed technologies will provide a high-quality user experience on any smartphone, which would in turn require smartphones to compete on their merits. Like, at what point did you decide? Like, Apple's A17 Pro in like single core performance beats out every Android device by like 20%, right? I'm just listing the positives right now, by the way. Apple now has a 10 gigabit per second USB-C port. Most high-end Android phones go up to 5 gigabits per second. Apple is widely believed to have like the highest quality speakers of any smartphone that doesn't have like giant front-facing speakers that basically destroy its design. Apple is largely understood to have one of the brightest displays at up to 2000 nits that actually sustains it pretty well and does not rely on wrong advertising in the way that, for example, OnePlus did. Well, in reality, they only reach 14 to 1600 nits. A lot of their advertising claims focus on like 4500. Apple has, by most reviews on their Pro smartphones, some of the best cameras on the market, and Apple has improved on historical shortcomings such as lower HDR quality. Regardless of less or more competition, they did so that people would upgrade from one iPhone to the other. This is also a thing that is being entirely left out, and that is self-competition, the idea that people will hold on longer to their individual iPhone before buying another iPhone. So there's a lot of stuff missing here, but I guess they don't have to make counterclaims, right? Apple suppresses such innovation through a web of contractual restrictions that it selectively enforces through its control of apps distribution and its apps review process, as well as by denying access to key points of connection between apps and the iPhone's operating system, called application program interfaces or APIs. I've talked about those. Apple can enforce those restrictions due to its position as an intermediary between product creators such as developers and the one hand users and on the one hand and users on the other. This complaint highlights 5 examples of using these mechanisms to suppress technologies that would have increased competition among smartphones. Okay guys, we are now very far along. I'll be continuing from here on unless tomorrow, unless there's like something big coming up in the meantime, like an iPad Pro launch. So I've given enough understanding, I think, here. I have countered some claims, I've supported some claims, I've hated the video presentation, and it's time for me to eat a little bit because my caloric deficit for today is, I believe, 3000. Thank you so much for anybody who watched, especially Josephat, who is like my most loyal viewer. Thank you so much. Thank you also so much for the super chat. I'll try to stream more often in the future, which I have held to that promise in the last 2 weeks. I've definitely done a lot more than in the past month, but I still believe I can do a little more, and this is a good opportunity to do so. Hopefully a lot of people pick up on this video as it gets uploaded. Please comment, please like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed this. As I said, you can find my Twitter and my Patreon links in the description of this channel. However you choose to support me, it's all welcome. And of course, if you catch me live, you can send me a super chat like Josephat did today, or a super sticker. It's all very, very much appreciated. Besides that, I think this is a very interesting topic and one very much worthwhile discussing. I hope that we can continue this, and I hope that we'll get more and more responses. I know that Apple has already responded to this, but I do want to, I'll probably start with that tomorrow. The Apple response basically, and after that I'll keep on like analyzing those complaints, because the reason why I won't read Apple's response today is pretty simple. It's because I've basically provided a lot of those responses today, but I do believe it will be interesting to like see what they talk about here. I see that it's all very, very like short in many ways. It all basically comes down to most of the claims they've made in the video as well, so I highly doubt that they will be countering me as well as they could, which I think some people could, but I guess I'm smarter than the US DOJ when it comes to tech stuff. So with this very arrogant statement and with this 2.5 hour long stream I'm coming to an end. Thank you guys again, guys, so much. I'll see you next time. Please let me know what you would like to see me cover beyond this, or surrounding this, right? If there maybe stuff comes out that is interesting, maybe YouTube videos that I could respond to. Maybe Legal Eagle will make a video about this. At that point, I would be probably interested in reacting to that. I know he allows that kind of stuff, so that would be cool. And yeah, I'll just see what I can provide for you. And you keep on providing the attention that I seek, I guess. Thank you so much. See you next time. This is Mark Tech, tuning out.